the next press conference on improving outreach and education in the cryosphere. And because we have a pretty large panel, I would like to ask Carmen de Jong, who knows all of you, to introduce you. Please, Carmen.
Yes, okay, thank you very much, Dick. So we have a very interdisciplinary and very international panel. So I'll just start maybe from the left with Mark Williams from Boulder, Colorado. Interdisciplinary specialist, snow, glaciers, permafrost, he kind of deals with it all. Then Matti Leparanta from the University of Helsinki in Finland, and he's a very famous sea ice specialist and working also on applied issues like oil spills and navigation. And then Bruce Molnia from the USGS in Alaska, and he's also working on a very wide spectrum of topics from marine subjects to right up to glaciers and eucalypts in the Himalayas and water management in Afghanistan. Then there's Marina Leibman, who is from the Institute of Cryosphere Studies from the Russian Academy of Sciences, working on all kinds of issues related to permafrost and very interesting issues, especially in the direction of coastal processes, landsliding, and the effects of climate change on permafrost thaw, on these kind of topics that you kind of forget. And then James Bryan, who's again quite multidisciplinary, from hydrology to biology, looking at mountain issues, water management, right up to wildfires and so on in mountains. Yeah? And well, I'm Carmen de Jong from the Mountain Institute at the University of Savoie, and we work mainly on water management issues in the mountain cryosphere and on other applied topics such as tourism and climate change in the mountains. So I will just give a very short introduction, because I have the feeling, especially in Europe, that maybe outreach and education in the cryosphere is not yet enough at the heart of people. That's why our title is Getting People at the Heart of the Cryosphere, and that's much more than just exchanging between scientists. It also means reaching out to school children, to students, and really making the general public aware of what is going on. And I put up this picture at the beginning to show that if we get people right at the heart of the cryosphere, it might be more easy for them to understand and actually touch it and see how fast it is melting, what is going on. This is in East Greenland, and of course also not only in terms of scientific investigations, tourism, for example, in the Arctic can also be an eye-opener. Cryosphere watching can be an eye-opener to raise awareness of the general public of what is going on, because I think the main problem is that the general public knows a bit about some small glaciers or some larger glaciers retreating or something happening here or there, but a homogeneous picture of what is happening so rapidly all across the cryosphere, not only on glaciers but also sea ice melting, calving glaciers, snow melt, permafrost melt. I think that this putting the puzzle together and really showing the public what is happening, that is what we could be much better at doing. And well, right up, as I mentioned, to sea ice melting, very impressive stratified ice block there. I can maybe show a video of Argentea Glacier a bit later to show some of the dynamics that is going on. But to jump to the mountain cryosphere, this is again, there's some really major issues, some major landscape changing to battle against climate change. And this is a photo of a group of European experts discussing anthropogenic changes to the mountain cryosphere. In this case, it's water reservoirs being built. But it's much further than that. We have to start at the school age, at the children, with awareness raising to make them sensible and show them what is really happening, what are the interactions between climate and human decisions, what are the limits of adaptation and mitigation. Yes, so with that I think I'll pass on to the panel, and we should maybe start with Bruce on glacier retreat and eucalypt issues. And if there's time, I can still show the video, yeah, at the end.
Thank you. I'd say we even have more fundamental question that we have to deal with. Most people who I speak to don't know what the cryosphere is.
Yeah.
I had a call yesterday from a New York Times reporter who told me that she was on her way to Alaska and was going to give a lecture. And I explained to her that I was here at EGU and was going to make a several presentations, one in the session on cryosphere outreach and education. And she said, "What's the cryosphere?" And I explained to her it's glaciers, sea ice, permafrost, snow, river ice. It's the frozen water on the Earth. And she said, "Oh." And I said to her, "Do you know how much frozen water there is and actually what the relationship between liquid fresh water on Earth and frozen water, glacier ice, sea ice, and so on?" She didn't. And it turns out most people don't. And the reality is that an extremely small percentage of all of the water on Earth is liquid fresh water. In fact, when you look at how much water there is, 75% of all the fresh water on Earth is tied up in glacier ice. And so most people don't realize that, but it's a dramatic amount of water. And as climate changes, the amount either increases or decreases. And when it increases, glaciers grow. And we get continental scale glaciers as we had covering Europe, North America, and Asia as recently as about 15 to 18,000 years ago. And when climate warms, we lose that ice. And the last time that we lost a significant amount of that ice was more than 110,000 years ago. And that was the last time that Greenland had no glacier ice cover. Antarctica is a different situation because of its location, circulation, and so on. The last time that Antarctica was ice-free was closer to 20 million years ago. But the Earth has a long history of glaciers building, taking water out of the oceans, and sea level either rising or falling depending on the size of the glaciers. So that's one of the most important things. Glaciers, sea level change, and coastal populations may be the most important consequence of the cryosphere on the life of most people. More than 60% of the Earth's population lives within about 100 kilometers of the shoreline. And in places, even a small amount of sea level change, just a few fractions of a meter, will have an impact on how people respond and what happens to their ability to maintain residences, coastal infrastructure, and so on. So that's a really important thing that we need to convey to the public. First of all, explain to them what the cryosphere is and how they are, whether they know it or not, going to be impacted by changes in the cryosphere with changes in climate. I want to call to your attention a series of publications that the organization I work for, the United States Geological Survey, has put out. We have a project called the Satellite Image Atlas of the Glaciers of the World. And when it's finished, there'll be 11 separate volumes. The Europe volume's been published for several years. The North American volume's been out for about 5 years. The first one that came out was almost 20 years ago. It was a volume on glaciers of Antarctica. The most recent one is one on the glaciers of Alaska that I'm the primary author of. And this was released the end of last calendar year. When the last two come out, the last two are Iceland and Asia, there'll be a complete baseline describing glaciers on Earth. And the general premise was to get a single decade as the point in time when all of the Earth could be compared. And the decade that was chosen was the first decade of the satellite Landsat, so 1972 to 1982. And so in this particular volume and in all of the others, there are, in this case, hundreds of satellite images and aerial photographs that show every part of Alaska and show what the extent of glaciers were at that point in time. And it's going to be a very useful tool as time progresses for scientists to look at what the past was like and make comparisons to see how the glacier cover of Earth has changed. So I want to make one other point, actually, in terms of outreach, if I may. In order to convey, convey to the public simple information about climate change, we put together this website called Glacier and Landscape Change in Response to Changing Climate. And although it's focused on North America and Alaska, the way we designed it is to make it global in its approach. So we began with a simple definition of what is weather and what is climate. Most people don't know the difference. In fact, we hear about climate change, but if you ask people, what are you really talking about? They can't give you a simple answer. They just know it's getting warmer. And then when it doesn't get warmer during a summer, or when it gets colder in the winter, they get extremely concerned that climate change and global warming aren't real, because they really don't understand what the terms are that they're talking about. So we tried to make it very simple and straightforward, simple explanations about weather and climate, links to World Meteorological Organization, links to other institutions around the world that will give them basic information. The next thing that we tried addressing Whoops, sorry. Would you please, I want to go back to that. I think I just need to hit the back key.
Oh, the back?
Yeah, there we are. Was a discussion of water on Earth. Again, most people don't realize it, but the greatest majority of water, more than 95% of the water on Earth, essentially it's 97.2% of all the water on Earth is in the oceans, salt water. Not available for drinking, not available for irrigation, not available for most human uses. Of that remaining 2.1%, as I said before, 75% of that's tied up in glaciers. So we wanted to talk about how water changes, how as population grows, the amount of available water for human consumption disappears or decreases. Similarly, we wanted to talk about, since glaciers are such an important part of that 2.1% of the total water, simple explanations of what are glaciers, where they are, how they form, and why are they important in terms of global climate. And then, because the focus for this presentation is Alaska, the majority of the presentation focuses on Alaska. And so, one of the other last things I'll point out is a section on glaciers and sea level. Because again, most people don't understand how tightly connected temperature, the amount of ice in the cryosphere, and how rapidly that is changing will have an impact on them. In fact, if you go to scientific meetings like this and sit in most of the cryosphere sessions where they're talking about Greenland and Antarctica, almost all of the papers are focused on how rapidly is Greenland, how rapidly is Antarctica losing water, and are we looking at a quarter of a meter of sea level change in the next century, half a meter, or extreme cases of up to 2 meters. And that's where the real scientific uncertainty comes in, how much change there will be. But the real question isn't, is there going to be change? It's going to be, how much change? And we need to convey what the consequences of that types of change are to the public. So let me talk about one other thing, and I'll turn the microphone back to Carmen. I gave a paper yesterday on outburst flooding and Jokul Alps. And one of the things that most people probably are not aware of here in Europe is that we have a very sensitive situation in Alaska where a volcano called Mount Redoubt is currently erupting. In fact, the last time, here you can see this is on March 31st, 2009. So this is 3 weeks ago, a photograph of the summit of Mount Redoubt. And it has been erupting off and on now for more than a month. What makes it important is that just below the summit of this particular volcano is an extremely large petroleum storage area called the Drift River Petroleum Terminal. And all of the offshore oil that's produced in Cook Inlet is pumped into this facility. And the last time Mount Redoubt erupted in 1989 and 90, there was a huge outburst flood that came very close to overtopping the protective walls that you can see here, the edge of the white in this photograph, that had been built to protect this facility from flooding. After the 1989 floods, the level of these walls were raised by more than 2 meters. But as you can see in this picture on the very right-hand side, there are a few dark areas, streaks of sediment that had washed up during flooding less than a month ago. And in fact, a satellite image of this shows the area where the Drift River Terminal is surrounded by the red or the orange lips. And you can see the extent of this last major glacier outburst flooding shown by the dark sediment there. And in fact, here's the storage tank, and you can see how close to being breached that facility was. Less than a week ago, they were able to get a tanker to the outflow point here and completely drain the tanks, and they've shut down production of petroleum operations in Cook Inlet. But this is a recurring infrastructure issue where natural processes, in this case glacier floods caused by volcanic eruptions, could have a major impact on the environment. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay. Bruce, thanks a lot. Let's see who's next, because we're trying to go a bit more from uphill to downhill. So, well, maybe we start with Mark, yeah? And maybe you can say some words. I think you don't have a PowerPoint with you.
Yeah, I didn't know the format of this at all.
Yes,
So,
what you're doing in terms of outreach and your main messages that you give to general public and children in your LTER stuff.
yeah, so Bruce just did a great job of showing how much water is stored in glaciers. But in terms of a large part of the world, the majority of usable water is snowmelt. I'm from Colorado in the United States. 80% of the usable water in the western United States, Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, Arizona, New Mexico, California, Oregon, is snowmelt runoff. And if we lose snow, we lose water. All that water is over-appropriated right now. And so one of the biggest effects on climate will be on the availability of water as snow. And people are starting to get that now. So one of the things that we do through an NSF-funded project called Long-Term Ecological Research Program is we're trying to reach elementary school kids. And as scientists, we're absolutely terrible at that. We're not very good at communicating to the general public in general and to elementary kids in particular. So what we started is a book series for third graders and fourth graders. And I can show you guys my PowerPoint. I can pop it out here at the end if you want to take a look at it. Where it was started by kids who went on a school trip up to our research site in the Alpine and Iwat Ridge at 11,500 feet. They were introduced to wildflowers and all that kind of stuff, and what really got them excited was they didn't realize that their water came from the mountains and from snowmelt. They just realized you turn on the tap and you get water. And so their teacher had them make drawings, watercolors, 2 feet by 3 feet, and the class did about 30 of those, and it was spectacular. So we based a children's book on that artwork. We hired a professional artist, wrote text at that level. It's about 30 pages, and we have the artist's professional drawings, but on every page we have the kids' artwork as well, and it's incredibly powerful. And then on top of that, what we've done is solicited additional artwork, and we put that on the on the web. So we have our first book published. It's called My Water Comes from the Mountains. It was very successful. The director of NSF has 4 of the paintings on his wall at the headquarters of NSF. And our second book has already come out, which is The Lost Seal, based on the story of a seal who ended up in McMurdo Drive Valley, a long ways from the ocean. Nobody knows how it got there. It was still alive. And we wrote a story was written on that. We solicited artwork from around the world, and we have 400 submissions of kids' artwork. And we all have it on the web. You can go to the web. You can search on your name. You can search by country, and not only purchase the book, but you can actually find the individual kids' artworks on the web. And that's turned out to be a very effective tool. We have 3 more books in that series that are in production right now. So I'll turn it over to James.
Okay. Well, thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I appreciate being with this group of colleagues to talk about the cryosphere. Yeah, I find that there's and I appreciate all of you being here today, but I find there's a real disjunction or a lack of communication in some respect between the scientists who are looking at the cryosphere and the public. So getting that message out is much appreciated. We actually do educational videos ourselves as a university to get the message out and to put materials in classrooms.
You're blocking your PowerPoint.
Yeah, maybe you go a bit more.
I'm not using PowerPoint, so that's okay.
Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe you can go a bit aside because your face is blue. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. There.
His face is blue.
How's that? Oh, my face is blue. Well, that's yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well,
It's an improvement. That's okay.
okay. Okay. Definitely. Definitely. Any change we could make is probably good. So the science community is fully agreed on the deterioration, on the melting of the cryosphere on a large scale. But the message isn't getting out there, and we really need that message to get out there. I think making it relevant for the average citizen is very important. Mark works on, we all work on the cryosphere, and the big concern, say 5 to 10 years ago, was melting of alpine snow and ice. And we were concerned about what that would do to things like sea level, things like water supplies, because that's a very important part of the water supply. When you hear about melting glaciers, that can definitely be important in some areas for water supply, but the glaciers are they're an indicator of just how much our snowpacks are declining, and that's where most of our water comes from, is from mountain snowpacks. And a lot of the world receives their water from mountain snowpacks. Now, in North America, in Europe, if we suffer a 10 or 20 or 30 or even 40% decline in our water supply, That would be stressful in our society, but we have many response mechanisms and we're wealthy societies. In the developing world, where we will see similar declines in water supplies in some areas, and the one place there's uncertainty is exactly where. But it seems that most mountain areas are showing the same level of degradation in snow and ice supplies. In developing world areas, those societies don't have the response mechanisms. And they're going to look to North America and Europe, to the developed world, to help, and help in a big way. So a lot of there's going to be a lot of people, and we're talking about hundreds of millions, if not billions of people who depend upon water supplies from mountains in the developing world, and they're going to be very stressed in terms of how they're going to continue to raise food. So that's a very scary proposition for all of us, and obviously the best way to deal with that is to reduce, change how we're treating the world, change how we're treating alpine snow systems, alpine ice systems, and allow those people to stay in the areas that they're living in now. Failing that, if we continue on our business as usual with a global warming, we're going to see large-scale transfers of populations. We're going to have to see that, and that's going to put a tremendous pressure. Much more pressure on North America and Europe to accommodate those people than there will be really within our own populations. We can handle it, we can adjust, but the developing world stresses are going to be tremendous. So, the average person, if you think that you're under stress right now in this current economic downturn, there's going to be a lot more stress associated with the difficulties of global environmental change, and particularly the cryosphere. And that's probably one of the areas where we're facing some of the most severe decline now. Now, I'm not a specialist in continental scale ice decline, but 5 to 10 years ago, again, our colleagues that did study those, the folks, let me just back up a minute, because I want to mention a colleague that we share in USGS. One of the areas I work in is in the Rocky Mountains in Glacier National Park in Montana. And 150 years ago, there was 150 glaciers in Glacier National Park. My understanding from Dan Frager at USGS, who studies those, is they're down to 37 glaciers, and they're down to about 10% of their ice mass. So virtually 95 to 99% of the water in that mountain, in that particular area of the U.S. Rockies, is gone of that ice mass. So that's a very scary indicator. Getting back to the concerns about Antarctica and Greenland, which was mentioned, again, that's going to cause major displacements, and our colleagues have noted serious declines in those ice masses in the last 5 to 10 years. And so that's certainly very scary. As I flew over here, I managed to get to a window in the airplane for a few minutes and look down at the huge number of icebergs that had calved off of Greenland. And it was very impressive, and it was very scary to see all of those huge glaciers floating in the North Atlantic. So, it would be wonderful to get more of this message out, to get people to understand that we really have to make a change in terms of our policies, the way our lifestyles in the developed world, to really arrest these changes in the cryosphere. Or we can pay now, buy insurance, or we can pay later and pay the full cost of a lot of these changes, and they're going to be very large.
Before we go on, I have to remind you, we only have 10 minutes,
Yeah.
10, 15
Okay.
minutes, so
Well, we will do 5 minutes.
if you
and
can
5
make up your mind
minutes,
who was
uh-huh.
going to talk
Yeah.
now, yeah, fine.
Okay, then maybe Marina wants to say a few words on
Words, because I'm not prepared for 5 minutes.
or less, it doesn't matter.
My colleagues are speaking of snow and ice which is on the surface and which people know very little about. What to say about permafrost, which is beneath the surface? So practically no one knows what is it except the experts. But it occupies almost 70% of Russian territory, almost, I think, 40% of Canada, half of China. So it is very widely distributed feature. And it contains ice, which I think there are several approximations, but about 10% of fresh water, which is kept in snow and ice, belongs to ground ice. What is happening on the warming is that this ice starts to thaw. and we are losing surface, topography blows down, sediment goes into the rivers, spoiling the water, changing the channels, going into the sea. And the coasts are retreating because this ice is thawing at the coast with the rates which are 10 times higher than it was 20 years ago, let's say. So also coastal countries are losing territory, their territory, because coasts are retreating. About outreach and education. We are very far from any success in this area, at least in Russia. And as far as I know about permafrost in the world too. But we are publishing a journal on popular scientific, I don't know how to say it better, on Cryosphere and especially on permafrost, and it is very beautiful, colorful, with many pictures, and some people are enjoying. And as to education, we are trying to take students, PhD students in our expeditions from other disciplines, not from permafrost, so that they do their research in their area in connection with what is going on with permafrost. So that's the way we're moving now. Hope in future we'll do it better.
Yeah. Okay, thanks a lot, Marina. So, Matti, you have your PowerPoint, and we will get that going. Maybe I can give it.
Yeah. So, yeah, this is the problem. It's coming from Mac, so we cannot see the picture here.
Oh, okay.
But when coming to Finland, which is the northern country of East Europe, and the cryosphere is, we have to consider that with public in two senses. First of all, what everybody is talking here is the climate change implications, which are predicted to be quite severe in the north. And the other point is that the whole Finland is now under cryosphere. The whole country is covered by snow in the winter. All the lakes are frozen, all the rivers are frozen, and also the coast of the Baltic Sea in Finland, all the harbors are frozen. So we have to consider, we have learned to live with this ice, and of course, if there will be severe changes in the cryosphere above Finland, so this will affect a lot of the nature and our ways of life. And this is a painting from about 100 years ago about night frost. So in 1800s, it was a very cold century, so night frost was the main geophysical problem because the crops were destroyed and we had famine years. And in our education, the groups we are educating is high school. We have special courses for high school students, and also we are educating teachers so that they can organize snow and ice courses or special projects for their high school students, and adult education and university courses. And so, as I said, one thing is to try to explain what is climate change, and one thing is to try to keep on the knowledge of people how to live with snow and ice. And we have seen it that because more and more we work inside and work in offices, and the practical ways to live with snow and ice is disappearing. We even see that in linguistics, so that the plentiful words of snow and ice which we have in Finnish language are disappearing. And my feeling is that, although I don't have exact statistics, that we have more people are drowned when ice is breaking under cars or under snowmobiles or something, when they don't understand well these problems. And I have been asked to write often articles in newspapers about popular science of these practical questions of the traffic on ice and skiing. So this is a bit, well, you can see it from there. It's a 500 years old map illustrating how we lived with ice at that time. So there was skiing on ice and also traffic going across the Baltic Sea from Finland to Sweden. That was going on even in 1960s. We had across the ice from Finland to Sweden, and now there is so much winter traffic that it's not possible anymore. But there are several cases where you can see that how people went and with snow and ice. And if you look at the map in the northern Germany and Poland, Polish coast, you can see that there were guest houses on the ice, because those time when there was strong ice, it was more safe to make a road along the ice than go to forest. So maybe we go to the next one. And there was also a mail road across the Baltic Sea, but it was very difficult in ice conditions starting from 1640, and there was a certain kind of boat constructed for this. And present time is the winter shipping, and the whole Baltic countries, mainly Finland, Russia and Sweden, we have about, Estonia, about 20-25 icebreakers which keep the main harbors open now all year. And it's very important to understand the characters of the sea ice, to know what the navigation conditions are. And when things are constructed on the coast, lighthouses or simple summer cottage piers, so the forces of the ice has to be taken into account. And this is an example of the Gulf of Riga, where we can see that it's drift ice which is displaced by the winds and current, and in a short time, so the navigation conditions can be very largely influenced. And in land-fast ice in the Baltic Sea, we make ice roads, and which is a very easy way to go between islands. And here also it's important to know the characters of the ice, to know how you go on with car or with snowmobiles or with skis on the ice. And oil spills, it's a very severe problem in the Baltic. It's a shallow sea and very dangerous winter navigation conditions for tankers, and we have had sometimes accidents with oil. Fortunately, so far, no major oil spill, but if something comes in ice conditions, it will be very difficult, because it's difficult to detect the oil by remote sensing through the ice, difficult to predict where the ice goes, and it's very difficult to recover the oil. I think that was maybe the last one. Well, yeah, just go one. Yeah. So this is, well, that's just go one. We have to. Yeah.
Okay. Unfortunately.
So, yeah, unfortunately, I transferred pictures from Mac, and that doesn't go so well.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot, and to all of you. And unless we have time, Bruce still has some Eucolob pictures to show. But I don't know if you would like to have
maybe
questions.
let's start with a few questions, and then we'll see where we get.
I'll ask a question. Jonathan Lake from Sunday Times. Hi, Carmen. We've spoken.
Hi.
Yeah, I just want to go back to you, Bruce. I think on the you said something about the rate, about the extreme case we might see. And I think you said we could get up to, I think it was 2 meters.
That is what was, that's correct.
What would be needed for that to happen? In other words, what kind of breakup, what kind of melting are we seeing?
Okay. Let me explain something that is a fairly recent series of observations. Since 2002, we've been observing both Greenland and coastal Antarctic glaciers actually accelerating, and that the volume of ice being transferred has increased by, in some cases, almost half an order of magnitude. Some of my colleagues at, actually, Colorado, have done some physical modeling to determine if you had that type of accelerated flow for the next 100 years, how much ice could you actually force through these outlets, and what would the maximum amount of ice that could be transferred to the ocean and have an impact on the ocean be. And they had 3 different scenarios. One which was a present state, one was a real extreme. And the numbers that they came up were from about 3/4 of a meter, which is just beyond what the IPCC and people who are familiar with the big broad picture prior to this revelation had come up with, to as much as just about, I think it was 1.9 meters, almost 2 meters, which would be a worst case scenario with continued rapid acceleration of ice exiting Greenland and coastal Antarctic glaciers for the remainder of the 21st century. No one knows. In fact, some of the papers that we've been hearing at this meeting have suggested that the rate of loss from Greenland and Antarctica continues to increase, but that the velocities of some of the outlet glaciers have been slowing down over the last couple of years. And whether we're looking at what was an anomalous 5-year cycle or whether we're looking at a new paradigm, we just don't know at the moment. But there's pretty much a general consensus that during the 20th century, global sea level went up more or less about 1/3 of a meter. And here we're looking at some new wrinkles that, under the worst case scenario, could cause a substantial increase in that.
So that's a long answer, right?
Right.
But if
The simple
if you
answer
put that
is-
to my readers, and they're
Okay,
going to
simple answer
stop
is-
listening halfway through.
I'll give you a 10-word answer. Most scientists agree that sea level could easily rise 1/2 a meter.
What I'm looking for, and I think this is a reasonable summary, is that there is a small but significant chance that you could see a breakup of a good chunk of one or two ice caps, one or two ice sheets. Is that fair?
That's not fair. No, I don't think anybody is prognosticating that. You know, again, a long answer. We always have been discussing the breakup of the West Antarctic ice sheet. Actually, not so much by melting, but by catastrophic sliding. No one is favoring that as a high-level option. But increase in the rate of flow in outlet glaciers in Greenland and Antarctica, which is different from a breakup of an ice sheet, could accelerate the volume of ice entering and the rate of flow of this ice entering the oceans and double what had been a reasonable projection of sea level rise during the 21st century.
But
So-
let me respond to that just a little bit.
Can I just ask a quick technical question? There's an assumption there that what's being lost isn't being replaced by extra precipitation. So presumably, because you could actually have an acceleration but extra precipitation
Right.
as well, couldn't you?
Yeah, there's a lot of, again, controversy because we have a new methodology which is using the gray satellite, which gives you gravity changes as opposed, and we're also getting more sophisticated in measuring the total thickness of, not thickness, but elevation of the surface using airborne LiDAR and laser altimetry and ISAT. So we have a number of new tools. What we're not seeing is a significant increase in the total precipitation that is replacing what's being lost at the margins. So,
Let's see, what was my thought here? I think the point you were trying to get at, and I can respond, is simply that there is a consensus that we're in uncharted territory. And we can forecast future projections of sea level rise, but we can't put any air bars on those right now. And they could easily be worse than we're forecasting. They could be less, but it's uncharted territory. And that's what's scary.
Can I just add one thing as well? Many of our colleagues that look at this, of course, say, yes, it's only a minor, very minor chance of, say, something catastrophic happening where we really see a dramatic change. But readers might understand that, if you ask how many of your readers have fire insurance, they'll all have fire insurance on their homes. And yet, perhaps only 1 in 1,000 suffers a house fire over a period of 25 years, but they all buy fire insurance because they can't deal with the catastrophe. Globally, we have to look at it the same way. The catastrophe, we really should be buying more insurance to prevent that, and rather than just saying, hey, it doesn't look like it's very likely, so let's go with it. And as we define the error bars, whether it's 1 in 100 or 1 in 10, by the time we've defined it, we probably should have already bought the insurance.
So let's just pin this 1/2 meter or 2 meter rise down. What would that mean in terms of the amount of the proportion or the percentage of ice lost if you got that kind of sea level rise?
very little. If you take all of the frozen glacier, all the water that is frozen in glaciers on Earth and were to melt it, you're looking at about 73, 75 meters of sea level rise. There's that much ice tied up on land, that much water tied up in ice. And the simple numbers are, if you melt all the temperate glaciers, glaciers in Europe, glaciers in North America, out of the polar regions, melt all of that, you're going to have less than 1/2 a meter of sea level change. So if you lose all the large valley glaciers on Earth, glaciers in South America, the few remaining glaciers in Africa, you melt Greenland, all of Greenland, and you're looking at perhaps as much as a 7-meter sea level rise. Greenland, as I mentioned before, has had an ice cover that's been extensive and actually was growing up until the last decade or two, since about 110,000 years ago. So substantial length of geologic time, long, but Antarctica contains something on the order of 65 to 70 meters of global sea level equivalent. Most people don't realize this, but as recently as 18,000 years ago, global sea level was more than 120 meters lower than it is today, because there was so much water tied up in the continental glaciers that covered Europe, North America, Asia, and parts of South America. And between about 18,000 years ago and about 7,000 or 8,000 years ago, sea level rose more than 100 meters. And it has been fluctuating ever since then.
Can I just add something to that? Of course, that very little in geologic time frame. If you go to many sources on the internet, you can go to Inconvenient Truth if you trust Al, or there are many science sites that document it. How many tens to hundreds of millions of people live within 2 meters of sea level now? A third of Bangladesh will have to be relocated. Maybe we'll go back and say, United States and Canada and Europe, you're emitting this many greenhouse gases. So of these 50 million Bangladeshis that we displace, you're all going to have to take your share relative to what the cause, how much you caused. So, geologically, it's a trivial change. In terms of humanity, it could be a dramatic change, and even less than a meter could be quite a dramatic change in terms of displacing people.
We could lose Disney World.
Hey, I don't know where the Times is in London, but all of London is stressed now with the floodgates. They think within a matter of a few decades they're going to have to close the Thames floodgates routinely because of sea level rise. So, is the Times on a hill, or are you equally in peril?
I think they're building up the Thames barrier by a metre at the moment anyway. Yes. They've got plans for continuing that.
And that goes back to the point I made that great, because Britain has the resources to respond to that. Bangladesh can't build up their barriers by a metre without massive help from all of us, and it's probably cheaper to just cut our greenhouse gases.
I'd kind of argue that one of the reasons, you can argue that a failure to communicate climate change and sea level rise is probably one of science's greatest failures in the last century, really. And there are all sorts of reasons for that. But I meet politicians in Britain who still don't really understand it or even believe in it. There's at least 2 or 3 ministers. The Northern Ireland Minister for the Environment doesn't believe in climate change, just for example. So you've got a long way to go. But I do think picking out places like Disneyland and all the other trivial but well-known hotspots that could be lost, that's the kind of way you need to think. Whereas what you've been saying today is great for people like me, but it's not so hot for getting through to people. And maybe you need to think about things like skiing or tourist venues.
I've given a talk on skiing on Friday.
Yeah. Anyway, I think I might talk to some of you afterwards, actually, rather than go on now.
If I can just add one quick comment. A Canadian politician who doesn't believe in climate change also said the way politicians actually govern is they don't lead, they just find a parade and run to the front. So we look to scientists and the media to actually, get the general population much better informed.
If I can intervene on that, I'm sorry, my name is Jean de Pomeroy. I'm a journalist for an organization called the International Polar Foundation, which has a number of platforms for reaching out to the public and to students, one of which is Science Polls, which is a news and information website on polar science. That's the high end. Then there is a website called EDUCAPolls, which has a number of tools, animations, and all sorts of educational products for reaching out to the public on the subject of the cryosphere. So I feel I'm slightly on the wrong side of the table here. In any case, you just mentioned we need newspapers and we need scientists to reach out to the public, and this is exactly my point. And in a way, I don't sound grumpy about this, but for me, there's a problem in this press conference. First of all, we've gone way off the subject matter, which is outreach and education. Secondly, there are hosts of organizations out there which are specialized in reaching out to the public on the subject of the cryosphere. This goes from publishing, and you're not a publisher, but your book is a good example, the Lost Seal. There are organizations such as Students on Ice, which take students to the polar regions. There are organizations such as mine, which has all sorts of web-based products, and we also do exhibitions. There are a number of institutions like the Exploratorium in San Francisco. There are hosts of education outreach organizations out there which are working really hard and which are getting more and more specialized in the field of reaching out to the public. And we haven't been mentioned, and the IPY, for example, a major component of the International Polar Year was an education outreach committee, an education outreach component, which facilitated and helped and promoted a lot of these organizations. So they exist, and we need your help. We need the scientists' help. This is a specialized job. It's a specialized field, and it's a bridge, and it's a bridge potentially towards the media. It's certainly a bridge towards policymakers. It's a bridge towards towards children, and we need to be. The scientific community needs to understand that they need that it needs us. And I say us. I mean, I'm not involved in the education section, but they need people, especially within the education section. So that was really my plug. And we need the EGU to invite these organizations and to promote them to scientists, so that the scientists know that we're there, and they can then be a clearer interaction. Anyway, I could go on.
I fully agree. But I also have to mention that maybe in Europe we're still a bit traditional in those kinds of issues. I have the impression that in the States you might be a bit more in advance, because just look at the statistics for this first... Sure. No, I'm just speaking about the EGU versus the AGU. By offering this first outreach and education session, actually nothing much happened. There was just not awareness there that this might be something important or something useful. So the people sitting around here, they are more or less all invited speakers. And I just do hope that such sessions will grow and, as you say, will form the bridge between your organizations and the scientists, because it's a very intricate system.
They need to be organized in a different way. We are not sessions. We are not scientists. And the other thing is that scientists are not the best people to communicate.
No, not at all. But that means
thank
that
you, John. I think we have to stop here. It's at 1 o'clock now.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And very interesting.
Okay. No, but it's.